Hi everyone. At one point or another, everyone has wanted to own a pet as a kid, and how we would beg our parents to adopt a dog or a cat. I also own a pet, which is a cockatiel bird, which we received as a gift from a family friend. I'm going to discuss the importance of adopting a pet from shelters and how it would be beneficial to adopt a pet from a shelter rather than bought from a breeder. All the information I've gathered are from articles that are reliable, that have been peer reviewed. First, I will discuss the importance for animals to be adopted. Secondly, I will mention the benefits of a pet from a shelter rather than bought from an owner's perspective. Lastly, we will talk about how there is a risk of contributing towards the increase of bad beetles. I'll first like to mention the importance of adopting a pet rather than buying from a breeder. Adoption is beneficial for the cut down of animals in shelters. Animal shelters and traditional shelters have something in common. They are limited in space. In an article about capacity extension in shelters by Nazil Toykin, she mentioned how 6 to 8 million animals are usually entered into shelters every year, and about 23% of these animals are usually euthanized. This is another way of dealing with limited space in shelters. If you don't know, euthanized is another term for putting a pet down with injection. In addition, with the new arrivals of pets every year, the animals that are adopted tend to be kittens or puppies. In an article about animal adoptions by Lowell Pearl, she mentions how 76.2% of kittens are not returned, which is the highest percentage in the article. Also, in this era, animals in shelters are mostly strays, that and that there is an increase in adoptions, but it's not exponential. In an article about unsuccessful adoptions by Lauren Perel and others, the number of animals returned to animal shelters is about 7 to 20%. The number is pretty high, which is usually from behavioral issues. In the same article, it says that the process of returning an animal to a shelter is a difficult process, and that many that do adopt pets and return them do not tend to adopt again. With this, there has been a solution by temporary adoptions, which is which is a great help, but an increase in adoptions is always beneficial to the issue. Now that I have discussed the importance of adopting a pet, I'll mention how adopting is more beneficial to its owner. Animal adoption tends to cost less than pets bought from a breeder. The adoption fee tends to be less than buying a pet. In an article called Veterinary Economics, they mentioned the cost of raising a pet for a breeder is $1,000 to raise a puppy, and 300 to 500 to raise a breeder, and how they expect to receive double the amount that they raise the pet with. Speaking from experience from seeing listings of dogs that I saw online, I when I used to think of adopting a dog, I went of buying a dog. So usually the price tended to be between $300 to $400 for young pets, but in adoption centers, the adoption fee usually tends to be 100 to 150, which is much less. The cost of vaccinations and training. Animal vaccinations for dogs is usually about 160 annually, but when adopting the an animal, it is usually vaccinated, and the shelter is able to inform the new owners if they had questions. In an article about animal adoptions, they mentioned how they would gather information from animals that were returned, and this was beneficial for finding reasons on why pets were returned. This allowed adoption counseling in the future for some shelters, which would mean that there would be post-adoption support services when a pet is adopted. Other than the cost of owning a pet, the source of how the animal is raised is also an issue. There was a risk of contributing to the increase of bad breeders. In the previous mentioned article about breeders, Krista Magnifico mentioned how some people get their pets from puppy mills. How some people want to save a dog, which is good, but they fail to think about how another puppy will take the place of that previous puppy that was saved, and how this would contribute to how this would continue to happen if people continue to buy them. If a pet is bought from a bad breeder, it would usually be unvaccinated and unclean. When buying a pet, it is also important to think about the big picture of owning a pet. From personal experience, I also thought about how buying a dog was how from how I wanted to buy a dog from the side of a highway, but I failed to realize was that if I bought that dog, the person that was selling the pet would continue to breed them for profit without caring for the actual puppies. In comparison, animals from shelters are better taken care of by receiving vaccinations in some shelters and fed on a regular basis. In today's society, many things are often overlooked, but it is usually a person's best intention to care for their pets when deciding to own a pet. At first, I went over the limited capacity in shelters to emphasize the need of animals to be adopted. Then I went over the benefits of animals to be adopted from the owner's perspective and how it would cost less. Finally, I mentioned how adopting would be better than the risk of buying a pet from a bad breeder. In the end, um, the decision to adopt a pet is up to the person, but adoption would be beneficial towards the pet and the person. Thank you.